What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today we're going to be covering the cards you need to compete in the 2018-2019 competitive season. We're at that special time of year where card prices are lower now than at any other point throughout the entire year, and that's because the National Championship is over, the World Championship's over, there's not a YCS for a very long time, so there's not a lot of competitive incentive to play Yu-Gi-Oh! At the moment, so a lot of players sell off their cards, which means there's an extreme surplus available, which drives prices down. It's very cyclical, it happens every year, but now's your opportunity to capitalize on some of those good deals. So I wanted to make a video on cards you should be equipped with going into this competitive season. This isn't necessarily going to be a budget video because we are going to be discussing some expensive cards, but if you guys want to see more of a budget style video that's going to be like this, covering some budget alternatives to some of the cards I'll be discussing in this video, then be sure to let me know down in the comments below. But before we get into the video, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest YouTube channel members as always. So big shout outs today to Aaron, Raphael, and Mutt Hunter. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to become a YouTube channel member, get your little Cimo badge next to your name in the comments and help support the channel, then be sure to hit the join button or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So it's not going to be competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Unless we start with probably the most important card type you need to compete, and that is hand traps. I know, a lot of you guys, some of you just absolutely despise hand traps, but if you're gonna play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! You gotta equip yourself with these hand traps because they are probably the most important cards you could possibly have. Now, some really good news here is that Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is reprinted in Shadows in Valhalla, and we've already seen the price of Ash Blossom drop to like $25, and depending on how, or if it's even short printed at all, or to what extent in Shadows of Valhalla, the price of it could be even cheaper for the super rare copy. So, quite frankly, if you're gonna play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And you haven't gotten your Ash Blossoms yet, now is going to be the time more than ever, and there's really no excuse because it went from being a $35 to $40 card, now being $25, and it's probably going to be even less once Shadows of Valhalla officially releases in a couple of weeks. So now is the time. You're basically getting 3 Ash Blossoms for the price of like 1.5 before the reprint in Shadows in Valhalla got announced. So do yourself a favor, invest in these Ash Blossoms because you're going to be using them in every single competitive deck you're going to play. It's going to give you such a huge edge because it's so just ubiquitous in what it can be used against so many different matchups. It's probably the best investment you can make. On the topic of hand traps though, if you're looking for another hand trap to basically supplement your deck, I'd probably say Ghost Ogre's your next bet, not only from a budget perspective, but also because Ghost Ogre just hits a lot of really good things. Now, it doesn't negate effects, I guess it technically like negates continuous cards and field spells, but the thing about Ghost Ogre is it's really good at removal. It removes a lot of things that can actually come up in a lot of instances, and it's very widely applicable because one of the biggest issues when it comes to hand traps is that the more and more hand traps you start to pretty much get in just your collection, you start to notice that they're very, very niche, and you want to have ones that are going to be more applicable in a lot of instances. So I feel like Ghost Ogre is kind of second to Ash Blossom being first, and yeah, it's about the $8 to $10 card, but I think definitely getting a playset of those is probably another wise investment. Can still be format dependent, but pretty much Ghost Ogre is going to be your next go-to. Another good hand trap you might want to consider is Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherry. Now, Winter Cherries is only about $5 to $6 at the moment, so that's an incredible price to pick it up at. Sure, you need the extra deck monsters that you want to hit with cherries, but realistically, depending on the format, that isn't too difficult. And for the impact that cherries has, especially against strategies that rely on the extra deck, it can be one of those high impact cards that just single-handedly wins you the game. Keeping on with hand traps though, Droll and Lockbird's a bit expensive at the moment at about $20 a copy. I would probably hold off on this at the moment. If you can afford it and you want to have them, then absolutely go for it, but I think this is one of those cards that's very specific to the format. I mean, right now we're being completely overrun by Goki, and having Droll and Lockbird to slow them down is very, very good. However, Droll and Lockbird, unless the format has accelerated to a pace where it's like live or die by opening Droll and Lockbird, it doesn't really see a whole lot of play. And yeah, sure, it can be used in Trick Stars with the Trick Star Droll Reincarnation combo. That's a thing, but just basically depending on the type of deck that you're playing, this is probably more of a low priority hand trap. Again, assuming, that Goki gets completely murdered on the ban list, or just wait to see how the format shapes up once the regionals and the YCSs get going, because I don't exactly think Droll is going to go beyond the $20 price point. I think that'd be a little bit ridiculous. If it does, it might go to like 25 at the most, but just keep that in mind. This should be one of your more low priority pickups. A couple other hand traps would be something like Effect Veiler. Effect Veiler is super cheap for one, and Effect Negation is always going to be powerful. Yeah, sure, it's a bit restricting in when you can use it, and yeah, it does target, but at the same time, for the price and just having the accessibility to Effect Negation, it's pretty good to have in your collection, and maybe just makes a good side deck card depending on how the format shapes up. Now, since we're talking about hand traps, another really good card you're going to want to have on your hands is Called by the Grave. This is basically the anti-hand trap card, and is really, really crucial for a lot of different decks to go off, especially if you're playing decks that have a combo that, if it's disrupted by a hand trap, can just completely shatter the entire strategy. Called by the Grave can be your best friend. The nice thing about this card is that it was printed at common rarity, but you can also get a super rare if you want to spend a couple extra bucks, but it's just an incredible card. It's only going to continue to get better just because hand traps play such a heavy and vital role in the competitive scene. Just get yourself a couple commons. It's not going to cost you that much, and you'll be definitely glad you picked those up. Now we're going to deviate away from hand traps and talk about some more generic cards and staples that you should definitely have at your disposal. One set of cards I definitely think you should have are the Nightmares. Now the nice thing is that the Nightmares aren't too expensive. I think Unicorn's at like 20 bucks, and that's pretty much just because it's a secret rare, but all the rest, I mean, Goblin's like maybe 8 to 10, and Phoenix and Cerberus are pretty much just super rare, so those aren't really going to be anything. The nice thing here is that any deck you're going to be playing for the most part is going to love to have toolbox access to monster removal, spell and trap removal, and just the ability to have an extra normal summon. There's very few decks that would not like to have something like that, and I think it just makes for a wise investment. Hell, Nightmare Griffin isn't even necessary, but because it's only like $10 just because it's the least played one, might make a pretty good investment, because it's only going to take a specific format for a card like Nightmare Griffin to become good, and if you just have one of each of these, maybe even 2 Cerberus and 2 Phoenix, I think that's going to be a pretty good selection of cards to have available for any deck that you might play. They're super generic, they're super toolbox, and they're just totally worth the price. Now I also want to talk about some more just generic staples in general. Cards like Twin Twisters, Cosmic Cyclones. You should definitely have these if you don't already. Twin Twister because it's basically the best spell and trap removal in the game. Cosmic Cyclone because even though it's a 1-for-1 instead of a 2-for-2, it banishes, which makes a very big difference depending on the format. Hell, Heavy Storm Duster is only a super rare as well, so you can throw that in. Yeah, sure, it's a trap, but spell and trap removal is spell and trap removal. Talking about a few traps though, there are cards like Solemn Strike you might just want to get. Dimensional Barrier is a very big card because even though it's not relevant at the moment, anytime a very just big strategy like Fusion, Synchro, Xyz basically comes back into the format, Dimensional Barrier has the possibility to see play in the main deck or even the side deck at the very least. And so having your copies of Dimensional Barrier, it only comes at common and also secret rare. They're only a couple bucks each. Having those now rather than being behind when the buyout happens later is definitely a good thing. And I also want to talk about cards that are going to be coming out in the Megatins. I'm talking about specifically cards like Saryuja, Borlo Dragon, Evenly Matched. Having just one copy of each of the Link monsters and then having a playset of Evenly Matched once the Megatins release at the end of the month, those are going to just tremendously help the power of your deck, not only from an offensive capability standpoint with cards like Saryuja and Borlo, but defensively helping get your deck back into the game with a card like Evenly Matched. I'm sure it's only going to be like a $15 to $20 secret rare at most, and that means you're going to have a much easier time acquiring these cards. Now, moving on from there, I do want to talk about some more archetype and deck specific cards as well. We're going to start off with the Sky Strikers. Now, the Sky Strikers are interesting because I want to talk about Sky Striker Engage. Now, I know Engage is like a $70 to $75 card at the moment, but I do want to discuss one thing as to why you might want to invest in these if you have the means to do so. Do you guys remember last year when Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring was down to like a $50 to $60 card, and then the competitive season picked back up and everyone realized, oh shit, I need my Ash Blossoms, and it rocketed back up to being around $80 or $90. I feel like Sky Striker Engage is kind of in that same boat right now where it's down to 70, but once people realize that this card is essentially instrumental in so many different decks just because of how generic it is, it has the possibility to go back up to being a $100 card like it was before. And I wouldn't really be surprised if that happens. This card is maybe not as generic or applicable as Ash Blossom, but it's one of the most powerful cards in the current format. And what you have to realize is this card isn't going to get a reprint for who knows how long. Look at Necroz. Necroz still haven't had a reprint, and they were printed in a very similar set to something like Engage, and it's been 3 years. So just keep in mind that Mobilize Engage is a card that might not see a reprint for several years, but might still be very applicable. Now, there is one big caveat to this, and that is the ban list. I definitely think Engage is a candidate for the ban list because it's that powerful of a card, but it's a very interesting dance we're doing here because if the card is at $70 while it's unlimited, that's really good and it has the potential to go back up, so you might want to invest in it. However, if it gets hit on the ban list, the card is going to have no value whatsoever, probably go down to like a $20 or $30 secret rare, and you just wasted your investment. But if you don't pick them up, you risk the chance of the card going back up to 100, 110, maybe even beyond that, just depending on how relevant the card is. I mean, Sky Striker is the strongest deck in the OCG, and we've seen that for months, so if Konami realistically wanted to make the deck the best deck in the format, they could do that, and Engage would basically be the central component of that deck, and you'll need 3 of it. So it's something just to consider. I don't want to tell you how to spend your money, but just something to keep in mind so you don't miss out on maybe having to pay an extra 20 bucks on each copy of Engage. Now, speaking of Sky Strikers, though, they still have plenty of cards that are generic enough that you might just want to pick them up for your decks because they can be used in any deck. You know, you've got stuff like Hornet Drones, Kagari, Shizuku, Hayate. These are all super rares and very easy to acquire. And then you've got cheaper secret rares like Afterburner and Jamming Wave, which might be a couple bucks, but hey, it's generic removal that you could play in a lot of different decks. Sure, not having Engage kind of hurts the consistency of that, but it's something you just might want to consider, and is a pretty low risk investment in my eyes. Another deck I want to talk about is Altergeist. Now, Altergeist is really fascinating to me because this is a deck that I really don't think is a candidate for anything to get hit on the ban list. The cards are all extremely cheap at the moment. Some of them might even be reprinted in the Megatins, and it just seems like a really good investment at the moment, especially considering it's kind of one of the sleeper decks of our past format that kind of was able to top here and there, but never really took off. Depending on how hard Konami hits these decks moving forward with the next ban list, Altergeist could realistically be one of the strongest decks of the format, and that's not really an understatement. So if you have the ability just to invest into Altergeist, might not be a bad idea. Like Meluseek's like $6 right now. I think Marionetta and Multifaker are like 3s. It's actually rather affordable. Hell, Link Karibo's even reprinted now, and that was one of the more expensive cards in the deck, but the deck overall is relatively cheap, so if you want to have something that's a very good rogue option or even possible tier 1 contender, Altergeist might be the way to go if you don't want to spend a ton of money. Now, lastly, I do want to talk about a couple of cards out of Flames of Destruction as well as Cybernetic Horizon. The thing you have to realize is these cards don't really have targets on their backs because of the fact that they're not going to be reprinted at least till the Megatins of 2019. Flames of Destruction and Cybernetic Horizon will be in those tins most likely, but they're safe from the 2018 Megatins. So what does that mean? Well, Infinite Impermanence and Ghost Bell are 2 cards that probably aren't going to get a reprint for at least a year, However, Ghost Belle is probably a card you definitely want to invest in right now. It's like one of the most played hand traps in the OCG, so if our format starts to mimic theirs, then Ghost Belle is going to become much more relevant, and Infinite Impermanence does demand a high price tag, but if you see that your deck is basically needing a card like that, or if you see the value in playing a card like that, it's again one of those cards that depending on how much it's played, it could go up in price even more because it's only going to have a single printing. So just something to keep in mind. Same thing goes for Cybernetic Horizon and Boros Sword Dragon. Boros Sword Dragon is probably going to go down a little bit more, but again, depending on how relevant it becomes in the format, could be one of those cards that sits at a very high price point because it's not due for a reprint in quite some time. So guys, that's gonna do it for the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about what cards you think are vital to have in the 2018-2019 season. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by pledging and showing your support for the channel, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.